Good afternoon. Thank you all for joining. We'll get started with the webinar, and if you have any questions, you should be able to pop them in the chat at the end. But let's move on to a better introduction. So, as you could have seen, the first slide that you saw was not easy on the eyes. And when we think about accessibility, it's really easy to get lost in just a wide range of tools, of standards, of compliance checklists. But actually, one of the most persistent and easily overlooked barrier is something really simple like color contrast. Globally, over 2.2 billion people have some form of visual impairment or blindness. So today in our webinar, we want to go through some common accessibility issues. My name's Stacey Gregory. I'm a Senior Account Manager at Elixirr Digital, and I will be hosting the webinar alongside James Carr.
Hi, I'm James. I'm the Senior SEO Specialist at Elixirr Digital, but I've also been heavily involved in developing our accessibility offering.
So today we'll have a little look at the European Accessibility Act. So actually, what is it and why does it matter to us? We'll look at the importance of digital accessibility across the board and the web accessibility standards. And then we've got a great segment today, which is a Q&A with our design and development team that are on the call and will introduce themselves later on. And then we will look at steps to become accessible and also accessibility in action, what you can be doing right now. And then we'll move on to some examples, and there is some time at the end for Q&A if there are any questions. So first of all, let's take a moment to just understand really what the European Accessibility Act is. So the EAA is a legislative move by the European Union to create a unified approach to accessibility across all member states. Essentially, it's about setting consistent standards so that people with disabilities can have equal access to products and services in Europe. So in real simple terms, the EAA is a law which requires everyday products and services to be accessible for people with disabilities. This act will make life easier for at least 87 million people. So on the left-hand side, you can see a little chart of the timeline of EAA. So in 2019, the Act was adopted by the European Parliament. The member states then had until June 2022 to transpose the directive into their national laws. And now, 2025, we have that key date to work towards, which is the 28th of June. And that's when businesses must ensure that their offerings meet the requirements if necessary. So I think the main thing, what we want to know out of the Act is really why it matters. Like why are we doing this? So obviously we had quite a big stat at the beginning of those living with disabilities in kind of the world, and it's a huge number. So first of all, we can look at improving functioning of the internal EU market. And by removing barriers between countries, it creates a level playing field for companies offering accessible products and services. It enhances accessibility for people with disabilities in digital environments. So we're thinking websites, software, and other digital communication tools. And it also encourages innovation and growth. So by designing inclusivity, what we're doing is we're reaching a much wider audience, not just those with accessibility needs, but everyone who would benefit more from intuitive and flexible designs. So looking at what sectors are impacted by the Act. So it doesn't just apply to a narrow slice of industry, it does impact quite a broad range of sectors that provide everyday services. So you've got the public sector bodies, e-commerce websites, banking services, transportation services, and also media services. Ultimately, it's about making everyday interactions more inclusive, whether you're watching a show, managing your finances, booking a trip, or accessing the public services. But really what we want to know is the importance of digital accessibility. So I'll pass over to James.
Yeah, no problem. So the reason that the European Accessibility Act has come into play and will come into kind of force in the next couple of months is the figure is that almost 1 in 5 Europeans live with a disability. In the UK, that's closer to 1 in 4. So 23% of working age adults in the UK live with a disability of some kind. So you can see it's really important to kind of include everyone within the digital landscape. So what it aims to achieve is enhance user experience for all, so improved usability and user satisfaction. So there are features that have been developed for accessibility, such as subtitles on your television, for instance, which have become kind of an everyday use. So now it's estimated that 50 to 59% of millennials use subtitles on the television. So it's an accessibility feature that was perhaps not designed with those people in mind, that has become very prevalent within that group of people. Expanded market reach, so access to a larger audience, including people living with disabilities. So we'll have a few more stats on that in a moment. And then enhancing brand reputation and trust. So clearly demonstrating social responsibility and inclusion builds brand image and loyalty. So we know that's the case. A lot of businesses that can demonstrate that they're working on ESG, for instance, tend to have a kind of a more positive brand image than those that don't. So if we move on to the next slide, we can have a look at some of those stats that I mentioned. So it's a commercial fact that businesses lose money from customers with disabilities due to inaccessible websites and products, and that's across the 5 stats below. So 70% of customers living with disabilities say they will click away from a website that they find difficult to use. So that's a huge chunk of possible visitors. 83% of people living with disabilities will limit their shopping to sites they already know are accessible. 86% will pay more for products from an accessible website rather than buy from a less accessible website, or a website that's harder to use, for instance. And the estimate there is that 4 million people abandon a retail website because of various barriers in accessibility, which all results in an estimated loss of around £11.75 billion, where people who have had every intention of buying from a website leave that website because of accessibility issues. So the European Accessibility Act is underpinned by some web accessibility standards, which we'll now go into. So there are 4 guiding principles to work with, which you can use the acronym PAW to remember. So it's perceivable, so information must be presented in ways that users can perceive. So if you were here for the very beginning of the webinar, you might remember that the opening slide, we purposely set that up so that you couldn't properly read it. That's a perceivability issue. Operable, interface elements must be operable by all users. So for instance, if someone is limited to using a keyboard to navigate your website and they are not able to do that, then your site is not operable. Understandable, information and operation of the user interface must be understandable. So there are elements in here around, so things like readability can be a factor, but there's also things like you can't use color as an instruction, as a direction. You can't say things like click on the green button, because if someone can't see or perceive green, that instruction doesn't work for them. And then robust, so content must be robust to be interpreted by a wide variety of user agents, including assistive technologies. So that's things like screen readers, etc. So there are 3 main levels of accessibility, and if you're already familiar with accessibility, these will be very familiar to you. So there's level A, which is the minimum level of accessibility, level AA, which deals with the biggest and most common barriers for users with disabilities, and this AAA standard, which is the highest and most complex level of web accessibility. So the recommendations by the European Accessibility Act is to hit AA standards. So it's all the things that we kind of would be used to. You'd probably be very familiar with them once you found out what they are. So yeah, we're dealing with the biggest and most common barriers for users with disabilities at that level.
Thanks, James. So after having a bit of a background of what the EA is, why it's important, timelines, etc. I think what we really want to know is, you know, what do we do about it, or how do we make steps to becoming more accessible? So for this part, we have our Amanda with us and Oliver from our design and development team, who are going to talk a little bit from their experience of being on the front line of accessibility issues they're seeing, responsibilities, and accessibility tools that you can be using as well. So firstly, I'd like to welcome Amanda. So Amanda, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Amanda Dupel. I'm a UI UX designer at Elixirr. I've been here for the past 2 years. My experience with accessibility started at a previous role I had at a different company where I was responsible for doing QA with real users with disabilities who use assistive technology in their daily lives. That was definitely my eye-opening experience with accessibility when I realized just what a problem it was and how inaccessible the internet really is.
Thanks, Amanda. So what are the most common UI or UX mistakes made when creating digital products?
Yeah, so from a design standpoint, one of the biggest issues, and one that you've already mentioned at the beginning of this talk, was contrast errors with color, imagery, and fonts. So actually, like a lot of those mistakes with contrast are on, over 85% of landing pages for digital products. So that's definitely the most prominent mistake. Also to do with this is things like text size or just contrast with text in particular. Things like complex navigation with a lot of links or an overflow of content in the navigation can be really hard to navigate, not just for using your mouse, but also your keyboard. That's also an important thing to be testing and keeping an eye out or keep in mind when you're designing things like navigation. Also with navigation, not just in the top header of a page or a menu or anything like that, there's also the navigation of the actual product itself. So the rest of the page and the content that you can click and interact with. Some of that stuff like inconsistent or multiple headers on a page can mess with the navigation, especially with keyboard users or other types of assistive technology. Another common one would be things like form labels. When you're filling out a form, you want to have a clear label that allows the user to clearly understand what they're filling out and why that information is needed, as well as like error messages and things to help them fix any mistakes when filling out forms. A lot of these mistakes, I would say, are pretty simple and easy to fix, like things like color contrast. Again, that's like something that affects, over 85% of products, and that's something that you can easily address by running things like plugins on your browser that allow you to easily run a check for color contrast. There's a lot of tools that are out there nowadays that check things like text size or keyboard navigation. It's great to do it yourself and test it yourself, but there's also now a lot of tools out there that do automated tests and will help you identify a lot of these common issues.
Really interesting. And just a follow-up question from myself is, if there's a brand out there and it's not quite accessible, or the color contrasts are off or the fonts aren't accessible, what does that look like for them? Is it starting from scratch, or is it quite a simple fix?
Mm-hmm. So with branding and colors in brands, a lot of times they might be inaccessible. Say they're using a variety of 3 different colors and there's not enough contrast between those colors. It's not a matter of completely redesigning from the start or scratching all of the work or the existing brand. It's really a matter of adding some additional flavor and colors to that palette to incorporate accessible colors and contrast. So you can really stretch a brand, an existing brand, and just incorporate more to make it accessible. It's not really something you have to throw away, which is great. You can always, further develop your system that's in place.
Whose responsibility is it to ensure products are accessible? Who does that fall on?
Yeah, so this is a great question. I think that, a lot of companies have people who are assigned to do accessibility testing, and a lot of times the responsibility can be, solely placed on them. But I think a part of the conversation needs to be about, the collaboration and the shared responsibility. I think as designers, we do have specific things that we need to be aware of, checking, and, incorporating into our design process. But I think outside of that, it's also our responsibility to just bring it up in conversations with our teammates, managers, other consultants, analysts. Everyone should have a level of awareness around accessible products and how to create accessible experiences. It's not just with digital products as well, but also things like, the PowerPoints we're making or decks we're sharing, any sort of visualizations, graphs. Those are all things that need to be accessible as well. So it's great to just have open conversations about it, or just, raise awareness with your team members to identify accessible barriers and implement solutions that will help, ease the load of responsibility and really have everyone be aware that it's something we all have to be responsible for.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, that's really insightful. And like you said, it's a collaboration. But when it comes specifically to the WCAG guidelines that James was speaking about earlier, how much do we actually need to understand? Because obviously they're quite comprehensive, they're quite overwhelming when I first looked at them. So how much does everyone need to understand when we're talking about being collaborative?
Yeah, I mean, it's great that we've already covered a lot of the, principles, like the POUR, the perceivable, operable, understandable, robust. The WCAG is, kind of based on those 4 principles. It's great to know the levels of compliance. I think everyone on this call having this awareness now is a great start with the understanding the WCAG. It is very daunting and can be complex. If you just go to the website, it's a lot of information. It's a bit more technical. I would recommend just going and seeing it, checking it out. But I also think that there's a lot of resources out there and checklists made based off of the WCAG that are much easier to follow or easy to follow, and can give you a basic idea of what you want to check when you're completing an audit. There's a resource that I use pretty commonly, and I think I can share this with everyone on the call, but it's the ALI project, which is an accessibility collective that just released a resource for a checklist for not only designers and developers, but just, as you're completing an audit of any sort of product, you can use these checklists to, complete an audit with the WCAG in mind. It makes the language a lot more friendly, and it's very simple to kind of just click through and check off all of the things that you've addressed and have an idea of what's outstanding that you might need to still work on.
Amazing. Thank you. Yeah, like Amanda said, we'd be happy to share that resource with everyone that's on the call today. Amanda, not to say that the design is the easy bit, because I don't think it is by any means, but I do think that once we get into the development realm, that things can look a little bit more complex. And Ollie, we've brought you on the call today to talk a little bit from the development side as well. So if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yeah, no problem. Hi, I'm Oliver. I'm a lead developer here at Elixirr. I've been working in development for over 20 years, and I was fortunate enough when I got my first role that I was under a manager who had accessibility at the forefront. So I've been working with accessibility for 20 years, and so it's now kind of second nature to me when I'm building something to think and try and work out how to make what I'm doing as accessible as possible.
Great. So being in the industry for kind of over 20 years and really having accessibility at the forefront, what is the most common thing you're still seeing today, or the most annoying thing that you're still seeing happening kind of on an everyday basis?
So I'd probably say it's a lack of education and knowledge of devs, implementing and testing accessibility. For some reason, the dev community has kind of grasped onto responsiveness, and that becomes something that you accommodate and you test and you kind of build around. But accessibility, for some reason, hasn't got that kind of prominence that responsive has. Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry, yeah, and then if I feel that kind of if devs were to introduce accessibility checks and working methods into their daily workflows, like we have done with creating responsive sites from responsive apps. Again, I feel like it is with me. I think it become kind of second nature to them, that they would just build something and not only test it on various devices, but then test the accessibility of those as well at that same point.
Yeah. Well, we're obviously very lucky to have someone like you and the rest of our development team that are very passionate about accessibility as well. But from a client perspective, how would they, or how would I, for instance, check if my website is accessible? Is there an easy thing that I can do to have a look?
Yeah, so whenever, just out of sheer, just the nature of who I am. As soon as I go to a website, I find the easiest thing to do is just try and use your keyboard to navigate the site. So just loading up a website and hitting the tab key, and you should be able to tab through navigation elements. Should a drop down, should be able to tab through those. There should be skip to content links should appear, and any interactive elements like form elements, buttons, links. They should all kind of have hover states, like visible, obvious hover states when you're tabbing through. So yeah, that'd be where I'd start, and that is usually where I start.
So really, that's something that people can go away straight after this call and kind of experiment on their own site to see if they can tab through.
Yeah, really easy.
Great. And then obviously I know that there are far wider issues also. And how difficult is it to retrofit accessibility into an existing website versus designing it from the start?
Yeah, it's kind of with most things, if you're trying to retrofit things onto something else, then it's better to do it and have a plan for those features to be. You might not do them straight away, but if you've got an idea and you know that you need to add them, that's always easier than building something not considering accessibility in any way, shape, or form, and then having to completely having to trying to retrofit. Then you might end up having to completely rebuild things. It depends what kind of changes need to happen. Stuff like updating colors could be quite a simple fix, but then if you've got elements like accordions or tabbed content, they've got kind of functionality assigned to them, and that can become a more difficult retrofit. So it might be the case that you kind of have to start again on some of that, or at least start from very near the beginning, because there might be some structural changes rather than just visual changes.
Makes sense. And then I know, Oliver, you have tools that you use yourself, such as Lighthouse or Axe, I think you might use. But are these automated accessibility tools enough to make a site compliant, or is there more that we should be doing?
Yeah, so there's they are useful, but it's with accessibility, there's not a do a check, fix all the things, and your website's then accessible. There isn't a one size fits all solution. So the useful tools, and quite often you find yourself using 2 or 3 of them, but then even if you use those manual tools, you run the checks, you fix the issues, you then still may have to then do the physical thing of, as I've said at the beginning, tabbing through content, making sure the tab indexes are okay, and you're tabbing through the content in the right order. So yeah, the good and the useful, and you can highlight a lot of issues if they exist. It's just, but yeah, it needs to be part of a suite. It's not one size fits all.
Got you. And as well as not one size fits all, I think what I'm hearing, Amanda and Oliver, is that it isn't a one and done. Like we know that there's this legislation that comes into play that may or may not affect businesses, but you know, it's not that we should be looking at it once, complying to all this legislation, and then just leave it. Right, it's an everyday conscious effort, and like yourself, Oliver, it's something that once you have it at the forefront of your mind, it does just become second nature.
Yeah, definitely, especially because a lot of if we're talking web, so many sites are obviously content managed. So your site could be compliant one day, someone goes and puts some content in that isn't aware that heading tags need to be in a certain order, they can't use a certain color for some text, and then that part of your website becomes inaccessible, or not accessible. So it's you need to do regular checks and educate anybody working on your site.
Sounds like definitely a movement. Amanda, Oliver, thank you so much for joining us on that Q&A. It will be great for you guys to hang around as well, and if anyone's got any questions at the end for Oliver or Amanda, please pop them in the chat, or hang around till the end, and Oliver and Amanda will be here to answer those questions. So moving on, now you've heard a little bit from the front line, is steps to becoming accessible. So how do we take everything and all that advice we've just been given, and actually look at how we can become more accessible?
Yeah, thanks, Stacey. So we've all been on the side of the screen that everyone attending this webinar has been on, and I think the natural question at this point is, well, how do we get started? We've talked about quite a lot of issues and features and things you can do to test, but if you're not particularly comfortable with those tools, for instance, what can you do, or what can be done to kind of help you get a bit of a foothold in accessibility and understand where you stand at the moment, and kind of what you might need to do to kind of solve some of those issues. So the best thing you can possibly do is you can perform an accessibility audit. So this is something that we've developed at our end. It's something we've developed between myself in SEO, with the UX and devs, just to make sure that we capture as much as is humanly possible. Obviously, as Oliver says, a website is an evolving beast, so it's probably not going to capture everything in one go, but it's a really strong start that can give you an idea of what it is that you might need to do in order to fix the issue. So what we do is we can do a site-wide crawl. So we scan the entire site to identify issues in the HTML at scale. So we can identify things like missing alt tags. We can identify things like color contrast issues, even things like buttons having sort of the wrong name or inconsistent naming across the website, that sort of thing. There's a range of them. When you look through the WCAG checklist that we send out afterwards, you'll get an idea of just how many things are tested. We can also perform key page testing, so we can test individual pages manually from key user journeys, whether that be conversion pages, product pages, service pages, anything that's sort of lead gen focused. We can have a look at those. So we can use a mixture of manual tests and AI-driven simulations to identify granular issues. So obviously there's elements of we can get each page to work, but obviously the flow between the pages needs to work too. So that would help with that. And then we can collate and assign issues. So what we do then is we'd report on every single issue that we found. We'd be able to tell you exactly what level of WCAG it meets. And there are some, like AAA, for instance, you might not need to look at, so we can kind of filter those out. We'd also be able to identify who needs to solve each line. So obviously contrast issues may sit with a design team, while keyboard tabbing may sit with development, that kind of thing. So there's lots and lots of issues we can kind of talk you through and understand where the kind of effort to address those might sit, because it may be that you have an internal team and we just need to pass that through to your internal team. It may be that you need our assistants to kind of look through those as well. So that is a very useful place to start. There is a small level above that, which we're going to do for everyone who's registered for this webinar, where we can run what's called an overview audit. So what we'd be able to do is we'd be able to say, take the different standards. So there's like the best practice, and then there's A and AA at various different levels. we'd run your site through, and then we'd be able to tell you how many of your URLs throw up issues for that problem. So it's a very, very quick kind of oversight of whether your site needs a full audit, and a good idea of how many issues are going to be thrown up as part of that process. So this is where we'd recommend you start, if anywhere. If you've got no clue what you're doing, definitely get an audit done.
Right. And aside from audit and your website, there are things that you can be doing right now from today that really put you on a good steed of being more accessible. So this is things like content creation. So for content creation, there is things that you can be passing on to your content teams, or if you're writing content yourself, or that collaborative approach of ensuring that everyone is on the same page. So it seems really obvious, writing accessible content by using simple language and clear structure, use inclusive language that considers all users. Now, a really interesting fact is that the average reading age in the UK is just 9 years old. That really surprised me when I learned that. And when you start thinking about it from the average reading age rather than kind of your target market or whatever it may be, I think those first 2 points become a lot more thought-provoking. The third thing is creating alt text for your images. So an alt text on your image is if someone has a hearing impairment and they're using a screen reader, that when they hover over the image, there'll be a description there. So I've got an example here of a dog on a yellow background, and a bad alt tag here would be Snoop looking smooth with his shades on. So we have no idea of what Snoop is, who Snoop is. We have no further context. Even worse than that version is a lazy version of not even attempting to update the alt tag, and it will just say insert description here. And then something to really aim for with alt tags is being as descriptive as possible. A dachshund in a mustard coloured jumper and matching glasses on a plain mustard background. So that really gives the full description from a screen reader of what we are looking at in that image. Another thing you can be doing is looking at your social media. So your social media is, again, another space where we can aim to be more accessible. So again, it might seem quite straightforward, but actually ensuring videos have captions and transcripts and describing images and posts. Now, as James said, a lot of Gen Zs are now actually watching TV with subtitles on. I think it's like 59% of Gen Zs and 52% of millennials regularly use subtitles when watching content. Now, with that being said, obviously, if you do have an impairment, then that is a crucial reason why we should be making these things more accessible, having those transcripts and having those captions. However, there are some other business cases of why you should be doing it. So TikTok videos have a 17% increase in average watch time when you're including captions, and approximately, and this figure really surprised me, 85% of Facebook videos are watched without sound. So that makes the captions crucial, right? So there are benefits of doing it. The last point is using accessible hashtags and considering readability. And I'm not going to go too much into it, but I'm just going to leave the lasting image of Volkswagen Italy and their Instagram page and how that might be misconstrued for something else. And then finally, websites. So as Oliver said, there is a big development part of it. Of course there is, but also we have the SEO side of it. And also if people are updating content on the site, you can see how this is becoming a full rounded picture of being accessible in more than one place and having that collaborative team effort. It paints the whole picture. So first of all, accessible websites improve SEO. They not only provide a better user experience, but they favour websites that are accessible. So it is best to be accessible. And then on a side note of that, a screen reader is, I don't know if anyone has ever done this on their phone, but if you turn on your screen reader on your phone and just try and navigate to somewhere on your phone, it's it really just shows you how annoying it must be for people that have impairments that are using the screen readers every day. And I've got an example here that I am going to play just on British Airways, just so you can get a feel for how irritating screen readers can be.
Skip to main content button. On board Wi-Fi. Heading level 1. Stay connected with the world. Work and your social network from the comfort of your seat with Air. Stay connected. Stay connect. Air. Wi-Fi. Service. A customer working on a laptop in Club Suite in business. Club World. Image. Swipe up or down to select a custom action. Then double tap to activate. Page 2 of 5. This allows you to stay connected with friends, family and colleagues using instant messaging applications and with text-based emails that don't include attachments. There's no charge for executive club members, and if you're not already a member, it's free too.
On the first paragraph, the screen reader was quite insistent, and the user had to continuously press individual words for it to be read out, which is obviously not ideal if you're using a screen reader. The next part was the alt tag on the image with the lady in Club World. It was an okay alt tag. We got the gist of it, but a really crucial element was missing, which was she was sitting on an airplane. Without that, we don't know if she was in the lounge, if she was in the airport, if she was on the airplane, where she was. And then thirdly, which I think is the biggest one, is the hyperlinks are not recognised in that. So on that last sentence, there is no charge for executive club members. And if you're not already a member, it's free too. If you don't have the extra context to that and you think it's free, even if you're not a member, that can obviously cause problems as well. So just a note to bear in mind what screen readers may be reading on your website. And again, something that you could take away today is testing that on your own websites, enabling the screen reader on your phone and just seeing, are you providing a good user experience for your website? So I'm aware we only have 5 minutes of the webinar left, so we're just going to quickly go through some examples and then we will be here for questions if anyone has any. So without further ado, James, do you want to provide detail on these 2 examples?
Yeah, of course, I can run through these quickly. So we've picked out 2 examples of strong accessibility from a digital perspective, from a website perspective. The first one we're going to look at is Amazon. So Amazon could be considered as being at the forefront of making online shopping more accessible for all. So they've developed features like streamlined navigation. I'm sure everyone on this webinar has used Amazon. Everyone's very used to how to get around it. It's very simple. So improved readability and contrast levels. From the screenshot on the right, we all know it's black text on a white background with blue links, and the buttons that you need to click are either yellow or orange, and it's obvious what they do. They're always in the same place. All of the information is always in the same place across the site, so it's very, very consistent. There's things like adjustable font size, which is important, and also text to speech as well. But Amazon are able to go a little bit further than that because they've also got the benefit of hardware aids. So like the Amazon Dash button, so you can order a product with a physical button in your home without ever having to go to the website. So if you think of that from an accessibility perspective, that's incredible. You don't even have to go to the store to get what you need. Obviously, that's also backed up by Alexa. So every single one of us could sit in our own living room and ask Alexa to add something to a basket for us or order something to a basket for us, and it will come and it will arrive. And that's huge for accessibility. That ability to not have to even go to a website to get what you need out of it is huge. So the last thing we're going to mention on Amazon is they even offer customer support services, which are specifically tailored towards disabled shoppers, so that they can help while navigating the site if needed. The second example we've got for you this afternoon is the Bank of America. So if you remember right at the beginning of this webinar, we spoke about the sectors, and one of them was banking. Kind of lawsuits around accessibility are becoming increasingly prevalent in the US. So there's a lot of focus on improving accessibility over there as well, even though the European Accessibility Act isn't a factor particularly. So the Bank of America has developed a fully compliant website which helps users with disabilities to access banking services. So they've got support for screen readers to allow visually impaired users to navigate the site easily. Adjustable text size and contrast levels. You can see from the screenshot on the right that again, everything is black text, white background, very easy to read, very obvious. The colors that are used are consistent, and I confirm everything stays in the same place, so you know exactly where you need to go to do certain tasks. And they even have remote sign language interpreters that customers can connect with virtually anywhere on demand, so anyone can get access to banking without having to, for instance, rely on a telephone use or like a chatbot apps. So those are helping to provide equality in banking services, which makes Bank of America one of the top proponents for financial accessibility. So that is just about all we've got time for this afternoon. So we'll go over the conclusion and the key takeaways. So we've been over the importance of the European Accessibility Act. Sorry, you would have thought I'd said that enough today. European Accessibility Act, including the timelines for it. So it all comes into play 28th of June, so not long to go now. We've looked at how marketing specialists can help you to achieve accessibility, and we've looked at that from a more general perspective. So the things that kind of SEO specialists can do to improve things like alt tags, like what designers can do to improve contrast issues, what devs can do, etc., etc. But also we've looked at what we can do more on a more focused basis in terms of auditing your site in full. We have also stated that accessibility is a continuous journey. I think all 4 people on this webinar have all said that accessibility is not a one and done process. It is something you're going to have to revisit again and again and again. That's the nature of a website. Multiple people updating something means that issues are going to creep in over time. It's just a case of getting on top of them if you can, and introducing other processes that kind of control those issues. And then we've also looked into the benefits of making those changes far outweighing the costs of implementing them. So if you remember back to those 5 stats that I shared right at the beginning, the kind of the cost of missing out on visitors who may have accessibility issues far outweighs the costs of dealing with their barriers to entry. So I think that now brings us on to the Q&A. So if anyone does, we'll just give it, about a couple of minutes, just in case anyone wants to add any questions. How does that sound, Stacey?
Yeah, that sounds good to me. And in the meantime, just to say thank you all for joining our webinar today. As mentioned, we will follow up with resources and the sample audit. And if there's anything that springs to mind after this session, you're more than welcome to reach out.
So there is a question in the Q&A. I'm going to say this is a question for everyone, so everyone can weigh in. Got one. Do we need to have our sites fully compliant by the 28th of June? So the answer to that one is no, but you do need to start making progress towards it. So this is not a case, as far as I understand it, of you have to adhere by that date. I will also underline that we are not specifically able to kind of advise on any kind of legal elements of the Act. We can help you kind of fix issues and everything like that. So my answer is based on everything that I know as of now. But yeah, the simple answer is no. The idea is that it will kind of roll out, and there is kind of a grace period for people to kind of work their way towards accessibility. So this is not a case of you've got 6 weeks to fix everything, but it is very much a case of, you know, the earlier you start, the better. If you can get ahead of competitors, obviously that's going to be a huge advantage. So I hope that answers, but we'll follow up on that as well when we reply. We'll try and give you a more exact answer if we can. So yeah, second question is, if we're not fully compliant by the 28th of June, what are the penalties of this, and is there any grace period? So I touched on that a little bit. In terms of penalties, they are going to be set on an EU state member state basis, state by state basis. I can't tell you what those are, but we will kind of be looking into that and be able to kind of supply some more general information. As I say, if in terms of the legalities of the European Accessibility Act, that's something that you kind of very much have to get kind of third party support on. That's it's very, very complex as far as I understand it. So yeah, we're able to help you identify any issues and resolve them, but perhaps not in the best position to kind of give you any information on exact penalties and what those might be, and like around what issues they might be given. So sorry about that.
Thanks, James. So I think that's all we've got time for today in terms of questions. But as I said, if there are any questions that come to mind, we'll be more than happy to collaborate over email or a quick call to discuss those with you. So thank you all once again. I will circulate the deck to you all so you have that for future. But yeah, hopefully you have got the steps to make your website and your social platforms more accessible from today. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Bye.